If you've been thinking about starting a ketogenic diet, I encourage you to just do it. Yes, you are the reason why I started this podcast in the first place. More than anything else, I love to empower people to take responsibility for their own health. And for so many people, a ketogenic diet is the most effective way to reverse metabolic dysfunction, which is the very foundation of all chronic illness. But to do this effectively, you need 3 specific tools or you're going to struggle and you won't see results. I do not want this to happen to you. So I give you these 3 tools in my free ebook, How to Start a Keto Diet. And you can go download your free copy right now at radicalhealthmakeover.com. I am delighted to introduce you today to Amy Berger. Amy is a U.S. Air Force veteran and certified nutrition specialist who helps people do Keto Without the Crazy. She writes about a wide range of health and nutrition related topics such as insulin, weight loss, diabetes, Alzheimer's disease, thyroid function, and more. She's presented internationally on these issues and is the author of The Alzheimer's Antidote, The Stall Slayer, and co-author of End Your Carb Confusion, written with Dr. Eric Westman. She is the lead nutritionist for Adapt Your Life Academy, where she helps create course content and coaches people through implementing low-carb keto diets safely and effectively. Welcome to the Ketogenic Diet Show, Amy.
My story is very similar to so many other people's. I wasn't born being a low carb nutritionist. I got into this whole field for my own, my own personal stuff. I used to be heavier than I am now. And I have a family history of type 2 diabetes, obesity, cancer, and stroke. And I spent years and years and years doing what I thought were all the right things to lose weight and get healthy and all that. And I could not lose weight no matter how hard I tried. I managed to cross the finish line of 2 marathons. I'm slow as a turtle, but I was in the Air Force. Like, I'm not afraid of a hard workout. And yet the weight just wouldn't budge. And I learned about low carb diets. My entry into this was actually the Atkins diet. I read, I think, the 1992 version of Dr. Atkins' New Diet Revolution, and it just made sense. What he said made sense to me. And I tried it, and I did not stick with it the first time. So if anyone out there kind of starts and stops and starts and stops, we all do that. I don't know anyone who did this and just never looked back ever. So I, stopped and started a few times before this just became what I do and how I eat. And it worked, and not only did it work for me to lose weight, but I could lose weight without starving myself, without having to like micromanage everything. And I got to eat really delicious food in the process. And I was in and out of a lot of jobs that I didn't enjoy, didn't find fulfilling. And it occurred to me, oh, wait a minute, nutritionist is a career. Maybe I could do that, And so I actually went to graduate school to get, formal education in nutrition. And I've been doing this ever since. And I do work with clients and I do group coaching, but I also do a lot of writing, like you mentioned my books. But I try to point out now that even though I got into this personally for weight loss, and I still help a lot of other people with weight loss, over the years, what I've learned about how powerful lower carb or ketogenic eating is for so many things all throughout the body. I actually find that weight loss is one of the least important things that this can do. And not to dismiss weight loss. If you're out there and you're living with obesity or morbid obesity, weight loss is great. It can change your life, but you can also literally reverse type 2 diabetes. You can reverse PCOS, non-alcoholic fatty liver. You can get rid of skin tags, migraines. I mean, so weight loss is great, but I'm very it feels like an honor and a privilege to be able to, help people understand all the other amazing things that keto can do for you.
Absolutely. The weight loss is sort of a side effect of getting your metabolism back on track. And it
Yeah.
just effortlessly occurs once you can do that. So it is sort of a side benefit, a fringe benefit, if you will. But for many people, that is the main objective. But what's happening underneath the surface is they're becoming more metabolically healthy. You've done a lot of research in this area of cognitive functioning. And perhaps you could just share a little bit about what you learned on your journey writing that book and the connections that you saw. And I'm always fascinated as to why this is such a mystery. And you've brought forth just such an enormous amount of information and research that it's undeniable, right? What the connections that we're seeing between, like you said, now doctors are now calling Alzheimer's type 3 diabetes because there's such a direct connection between blood glucose levels sustained over long periods of time and cognitive function. So maybe you could just share a little bit about that.
Yeah, so my first book was called The Alzheimer's Antidote, and like you said, it's if people are wondering, well, why would a nutritionist write a book about Alzheimer's? They regularly call Alzheimer's disease type 3 diabetes. And I have to clarify, or maybe just kind of go further with something you said about the fact that type 2 diabetes, chronically high blood sugar, is a massive risk factor for developing Alzheimer's or cognitive impairment or decline. And the thing is, though, even if you don't have diabetes, but if you have chronically high insulin, so insulin resistance or metabolic syndrome, or frankly, millions of people are living with this and don't even know it. That's just the reality. So even if your blood sugar is normal, so you don't have diabetes, but if your blood sugar is normal because it's being kept in check by really high insulin, that too, that chronically high insulin is also a major, major risk factor. And it's interesting that we take for granted that most chronic non-infectious non-communicable illnesses that people live with today come from diet and lifestyle, right? Whether it's hypertension, acid reflux, cardiovascular disease, diabetes. We don't even question anymore that those come from diet and lifestyle. And yet, when it comes to the brain, when it comes to dementia, when it comes to Alzheimer's, we sort of like we don't even entertain the possibility that this could be every bit a diet and lifestyle issue because the incidence of this stuff is exploding just like type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease. And it's affecting people at ever younger ages, just like the right type 2 diabetes used to be called adult onset. Now they just call it type 2 because we have toddlers who get type 2 diabetes. We have toddlers with little tiny toddler fatty livers. We have teenage girls living with PCOS. And so we see all of these metabolic things happening at younger ages, al- just like Alzheimer's, right? Alzheimer's used to be exclusive to the elder. Oh, grandma's getting senile, grandpa's losing his marbles. Now it's people in their 50s and 60s. So, and there's many other things that can contribute to cognitive decline other than the blood sugar and insulin problems. I'm not saying that's the only thing, but that's a huge part of it. People think it's such a mystery. It's not. When I was doing the research for my book, and my book's been out for 5 years already, when I started doing the research, I was amazed at how much scientific research there is to support this. It was everywhere, like on PubMed and all the published peer-reviewed journals. It's everywhere. And it's more of a shock to me now, but even then it was a shock. How is nobody talking about this? You go to the Alzheimer's Association website, I don't think there's one mention of impaired brain glucose. So that's the thing in Alzheimer's for everybody watching or listening. The main problem in the Alzheimer's brain is that the neurons are no longer taking up and metabolizing glucose properly. So it's sort of like a fuel shortage or an energy crisis, and it's as if your brain is starving to death. So of course you're going to have memory loss, you're going to have personality changes and all this stuff. And there's not a single mention of what they call impaired brain glucose metabolism on those Alzheimer's websites. That is what the mystery is to me.
No matter what the name of the disease is, what we now know is that virtually every chronic illness is rooted in metabolic dysfunction. And whether it shows up in your brain or your ovaries with, like you said, PCOS, or whether it's um, ADD, depression, anxiety, heart disease, atherosclerosis, high blood pressure, these are all symptoms of the same cause, which is metabolic dysfunction. And I find it so fascinating. I mean, I've been talking about this as long as probably you have. And now it seems like it's catching on a little bit. People are seeing the research, people are beginning to understand, they're even renaming these diseases. And it's a great time to be a mouthpiece for this reality in the world, because more and more people need to hear this message. And the other place that it's not really being spoken about too, and we haven't really talked about this today, but in the area of cancer, right? So cancer also is one of those diseases fueled by glucose, and I'm always fascinated that nobody's talking about that either. So more and more, it's the word's getting out, and it's very exciting, and it's so important that as many people as possible are gaining knowledge about this and sharing it. And so that's really why I'm doing this, is just to get the message out there, get this word out there and the information out there to people so that they can become more aware and make more informed choices about their health. So, would you say that one of the most important tests that people could get is a fasting insulin, or where would you direct somebody to go to find out about their metabolic function on a cellular level?
Yeah, that's a great question. And let me I'm going to come back to that in a second. I just want to sort of reiterate like what I said about Alzheimer's, that there's a lot of things that can contribute. The insulin glucose is one big aspect. I feel the same way with regard to the PCOS, the diabetes, all of that stuff. And cancer especially. Like, I don't want anyone to think that diet alone is the cause or the solution. It's not. Like, I can't we have to be like really careful about what we say about cancer. Certainly chronically high glucose and insulin make it worse. They do. Do they cause it? We can't really say, um, but they definitely worsen outcomes. But
Mm,
that's just I try to be like really careful about what we say about cancer. We
yeah.
The research is emerging, and I it's fascinating, but there's a lot more we know about these other kind of like metabolic syndrome related things. But yeah, the fasting insulin is interesting. I think it's always worth doing, right? Because and just to clarify for people listening or watching, we are talking about fasting insulin, not glucose. Now you test your glucose too, but that's sort of pretty standard. That's kind of included as a standard in a routine checkup or routine blood work. You really, at least in the US, you have to specifically ask for the insulin. And it's not an expensive test. It's not some huge, hardship. But the problem with measuring the fasting insulin is that just like blood sugar, blood glucose, in many people, the fasting level is normal, right? Let's say you had dinner at, 6 or 7 p.m., even if you had a late dinner, but then you go to sleep for several hours, you wake up, by the time you get to the lab, your insulin level might be back down to normal, low normal. But if you eat a meal, especially a high carbohydrate meal, your insulin level might really skyrocket and stay elevated for most of the day, or for at least several hours before it starts to come back down. And the fasting level won't tell you that. Now, I still think the fasting level, in my opinion, should be a routine part of a checkup, just like fasting glucose. Because if your fasting level is very, very high, okay, you automatically that's a problem. But if it's not high, then what? Then I think there's a couple of things you can do. You There's probably other indicators
Mhm.
that will tell you have chronically high insulin, like if your triglycerides are really high, if your HDL is really low, if you've got a really large waist circumference, all of these diagnostic criteria for metabolic syndrome. If you have high blood pressure, they call it essential hypertension, like it's unexplained, we don't know what's causing it. PCOS, like I said, skin tags, all kinds of things. But you could also do something called the Kraft test, because it was pioneered by a doctor named Joseph Kraft, which is the oral glucose tolerance test, where you drink that glucose. But instead of only measuring your blood glucose at these intervals, they measure your insulin as well. And
Mm.
it's a 5-hour test instead of the standard 2 hours. But I don't recommend anyone to do that. I don't, why would you want to drink 100 grams of liquid glucose? Or the craft test might be 75. You just test the fasting insulin, or if your doctor won't order it, you can get it done yourself. But like I said, you don't even really need to, because there's going to be other indicators
Right.
either in your labs or in your body
Right.
that
So the
tell you you have
visual,
this problem. Yeah.
right. So you'll see these things. You'll notice you're gaining weight around the midsection. You'll notice, maybe a little bit elevated blood pressure, things like that. Like you said, the triglycerides is a really good indicator, and also an hemoglobin A1C can be a indicator of your.
Well, no, that's the problem. This is why so many people don't know that they have chronically high insulin, because the fasting blood sugar and even the hemoglobin A1C can be kept in check. They can be kept at a normal level because the insulin is so high. It's only when you have been loaded up with insulin for so long that even that very high amount of insulin is no longer powerful enough to keep the blood sugar down.
Right.
That's when the glucose and the A1C start to rise. By the time that happens, you've had this problem. Some studies say that your insulin will be elevated up to 20 years before the blood sugar starts to rise. Now, I think that's rare. I think in most people it probably is a few years, maybe not 20, but um, that's why so many people don't know they have the insulin problem, because nobody measures insulin. They're only measuring the glucose, and the glucose is normal. Never mind the fact that they have this long list of, again, unexplained medical problems.
Right. This is why it's such a hidden problem. And that's a really good distinction that you bring up, is that if the mechanisms are working, they're working until they don't work. And they're keeping your blood sugar at a normal, in a normal range, at least some of the time. But what I think you're speaking to is really the phenomenon of what we would call insulin resistance. Is that correct?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. And so by the time people figure out that they're insulin insensitive, or their cells aren't receiving the message from insulin, it's because their cells are so overstuffed with glucose that literally no more glucose molecules can fit into those cells. And so then it's spilling out into the blood. And then by that time, it's really progressed down the road. And that's when things are very difficult to reverse, but absolutely possible. I don't know how that would be for Alzheimer's. I mean, Alzheimer's, is that reversible? And what are we seeing with people that are able to change their diet in that realm?
So that is the gazillion dollar question. I think if caught early enough, if caught early enough, I think you can make a pretty big dent in it by going on a ketogenic diet or a very low carb diet, and doing as much as you can to correct that insulin resistance. I do think, and there are studies are showing now that ketogenic diets or even exogenous ketones or medium chain triglyceride preparations can improve cognitive function in what they call mild cognitive impairment, which is the precursor to Alzheimer's, and also in like early stage Alzheimer's. I think if you're in the late stage, if the disease is really severe and advanced, I think there is a point of no return where you cannot reverse it. You cannot really regress it. I think what you can do in those situations is potentially improve cognitive function and quality of life in the time that person has left by using a ketogenic diet or these other outside ketone therapies. And I say that because like I was saying earlier, the problem in the brain in Alzheimer's is that the brain, for whatever reason, we don't even really know the true cause, but the brain is no longer metabolizing glucose, so these cells are kind of starving. Tons, and like the most encouraging, most promising thing I can say about Alzheimer's is that mountains of research, and what I consider mountains by this point, show that even though the brain is not taking up and using glucose, it does take up and use ketones. So when we can get this like alternative fuel, oh, all of a sudden these cells have a little bit of fuel, they have a little bit of energy. So that it's not 100%, but in many cases, people do have improved cognition. But whether that's going to actually reverse the disease, probably not. But that even that short-term improvement is better than nothing because there's no treatment for this disease. There are drugs that basically are useless. There's no effective treatment. So if that's the best we can do for now, let's do it. Give these people the ketones, turn the lights on a little bit, however much we can.
Right. And the same phenomenon is true with patients that some people that suffer from seizures, right? The brain doesn't have the fuel source or it's not able to utilize the glucose, but it can. Oftentimes, seizures can be reversed by changing the fuel source in the brain. And we've known this for decades. And so it's not that far off to extrapolate that the same thing may be going on with a lot of other um, mental illness, cognitive decline, degenerative neurodegenerative diseases in general, and that sort of thing. So it's not really new information, but I'm curious, how did you settle on wanting, what inspired you to dive into the research in Alzheimer's specifically?
Yeah. I will say with the seizures, there's a lot. The glucose and ketone is one factor. There's so many other mechanisms for seizures, but keto kind of like addresses them all with this one change. It affects so many different biochemical things that, and I mean, the ketogenic diet was created for epilepsy. It
Right.
is an epilepsy diet that, ooh, it just so happens to also work really well for all of these other things. But I got into Alzheimer's. I have no family history of this at all. But I read the book Good Calories, Bad Calories. I'm sure you and your viewers are really familiar by Gary Taubes. And he had a chapter in there that covered, I think the chapter title was something like dementia, cancer, and aging. And it was the first time I ever heard of a connection between glucose and insulin and Alzheimer's. And I was already following a low carb diet for a long time before I read this. So I was thinking, wow, I've been at this a long time. I've been learning about this a long time and I've never heard of this before. How interesting. But not I really didn't have any personal connection to it. So I was like, oh, that's interesting. I'll just file it away. And it was a few years later that I was in graduate school for nutrition and I had to write a thesis. And I was going to do a literature review, which basically you choose a topic and you do like a really deep dive into the published science. And when I was picking a topic, I remembered that and I said, "Oh, let me, what is a topic that I could write about that hasn't already been written about a million times, that there's enough research on and that I would actually want to learn about and write about." So I said, "Let me go back to that Alzheimer's thing." And I just like I was mentioning earlier, when I just started looking into the journals, looking on PubMed, like glucose, Alzheimer's, whatever I searched for, it was a long time ago. I was amazed at how much research it was everywhere. Like you had to deliberately ignore it to not see it, to miss it. And so I wrote it and after I graduated, I I couldn't imagine keeping it to myself because I really felt, and I still feel now, that it is potentially life-changing information. And I said, this thing is going to sit on my professor's desk and no one's ever going to see it. So I turned it into a little ebook. And I'm never going to be this lucky again, but a publisher saw the ebook and offered me like a real book deal to turn it into a more fleshed out actual published book. And that is now the Alzheimer's Antidote. But and I'm glad, I'm glad that I did find out about it because at the time, nobody was really talking about it. Now there's a physician named Mary Newport has written a few books about it. Dr. Dale Bredesen has written a few books about it. But when I was first writing my book, there was nothing. And like you were mentioning, this insulin resistance, insulin and glucose problems are the root cause of so many different things. They're all the same problem showing itself in different ways in different people. It's almost like hypertension is the symptom, insulin resistance is the problem. PCOS is the symptom, insulin is the problem. And the talk that I gave at that symposium in San Diego where we met, I covered the similarities with this neuron glucose starvation problem, that we don't just see it in Alzheimer's. We see the exact same thing in Parkinson's disease, in multiple sclerosis, maybe a little bit in ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, Huntington's disease. All of them have that in common, where those cells are not properly using glucose. And I can't, well, let me not say any more about it, but that, I mean, because I'm going to go down a little rabbit hole, but I find that
Okay.
fascinating that all of those neurodegenerative disorders have that in common. And
Wow.
again, nobody's talking about it.
Well, you are, and so if you could go down the rabbit hole, if you want further, you're welcome to, because you are one of the few people talking about this. So I invite you to, you know,
To
be
geek out, as
courageous,
they
and
say.
you know, I can edit it out if you really feel that it's not something worthy of sharing, but I'm definitely wanting to pick your brain about this because it's
Yeah, no, I'll
really
just say,
fascinating.
this is my hunch. I can't back this up necessarily, but from what I've seen in the published research, all of those disorders look very similar at the molecular level, at the cell. When you look at what is the problem in this cell, all of them are not generating enough energy. And it is specific to glucose. For whatever reason, they are not metabolizing glucose properly. Sometimes they can still take up and use ketones. And it just, there's so much now about disturbed metabolism in these cells. And when scientists use the word metabolism, they mean energy, that these cells don't have enough energy. That's why in MS you have the fatigue, you have the muscle weakness, you have, all of this stuff. And that's the best way I can really explain it. When you zoom in on the cellular level, all of these disorders look very similar, just like the hypertension, the high triglycerides, the PCOS, the fatty liver, the all of those things look, even BPH, benign prostate enlarged prostate glands, same thing, chronically high insulin. It's the same problem, show like manifesting differently. Maybe this family has the genetic susceptibility of Alzheimer's. That family has the genetic susceptibility of Parkinson's, but it's coming from the same thing. And again, that's speculation on my part, but I think it's educated speculation. It's me speculating based on what I've read about these disorders. It's not just
Right.
like, oh, let me pull this out of thin air, out of nowhere.
Right. And we heard it over and over and over again at the symposium, that you were not the only one saying this. And it was a repetitive theme throughout the week that we were there listening to all of the brilliant scientists and researchers and doctors and people that are aware and really have spent their life energy diving into the research. And so with that, I wanted to ask you, so what would you have to say to people who, and I see this all over all the time on the internet and the interwebs of media, is that, oh, the keto diet's just a fad diet, it doesn't really work and it's dangerous, and all of that kind of thing. I think there is so much more being spoken about the keto diet now, which is fantastic. But of course, you have the skeptics who don't understand that this is scientifically rooted. It's not necessarily something that, all of these doctors are just pulling out of thin air, or we're the fringe people over here that are touting this, dietary therapy as being something that actually can help with so many problems. It seems almost impossible to think that this diet could help with so many different things. So I understand the skepticism that people are, seeing out there, which is like, how can it help with this? And how can it help with that? People just say it helps with everything. And, it's just a fad. So what do you have to say to those people?
Where do I start? I did a very passionate, ranty video about this a while back. I don't know, maybe we can include it in the notes or something, but it's 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 one thing for your Uncle Bill to say, "Oh, that crazy keto diet," or your neighbor, your fourth grade teacher sending you stuff on Facebook, "Oh, keto makes your liver explode," or whatever. anyone who says that this is a fad or this is some crazy kook thing simply does not know the science. When you read the research and when you understand basic human physiology, you cannot unsee it. My co-author on the book End Your Carb Confusion, Dr. Eric Westman, has been using this in a clinic at Duke University for 20 years. He regularly, again, gets people off their insulin for type 2 diabetes, gets people off blood pressure medicine. The ketogenic diet is the only way of eating that does work for so many conditions for which there is no treatment. None.
Quick break from the programming today, because nothing lights me up more than empowering people to make informed decisions about their health based on hard scientific facts. The ketogenic diet has stood the test of time, and the scientific literature shows us that this can be a powerful healing strategy. Don't let another day slip by when you could be doing something proactively to change your health. If you're still wondering how to begin your keto diet, it's time to stop thinking and start doing today. Just do it. Go to radicalhealthmakeover.com and download your free copy of my ebook, How to Start a Keto Diet. Now, back to the program.
Or like including all the kids that have refractory epilepsy, so where the drugs don't work. Sometimes the diet works, not always. Sometimes the diet works. There's glycogen storage diseases. There's these rare genetic inborn errors of metabolism that keto helps just because of the biochemical changes that happen. Like, this is not some fad weight loss diet. You can lose weight, yeah, but it is a crime. It is a crime when medical and nutrition and dietetics professionals actively scare people out of trying this when it could quite literally change or save your life. It even works for type 1 diabetes. If you have type 1, you will always need to use a little bit of insulin. You can massively reduce the doses you require, which reduces those super highs and lows. Dr. Bernstein calls it the law of small numbers. The less insulin you need, the less volatility there's going to be in your blood sugar. I mean, it's a crime, because how many people have been to doctor after doctor after doctor with no help, and they find some video on YouTube and their whole life is different for the better, and there's even a book, if we even just want to talk about weight loss, if it's a fad that's been around for 200 years, because there's a really famous book called The Physiology of Taste that was published in 1825. And the guy says that basically, if you want to lose weight, cut way back on sugar and starch. 1825. This was before they even discovered insulin, before they discovered leptin, before they discovered, like I but I totally agree with you. You can totally understand why people think you're crazy or they think it's wacky, because they just don't know. They look on the internet and they think keto is 4 burger patties drowning in melted cheese. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but they don't understand. They think keto is just bacon and bacon dipped in butter with more bacon. And they're just uninformed, but it's fine if they're uninformed, but they are basically withholding life-changing information from their patients. And I'm not going to say it's malpractice, because they're doing what they think is right. But it's like I say, you can't, once you know about this, you can't unknow it. And again, my co-author, Dr. Westman, has the greatest saying, because no matter what condition somebody has, you're like, oh, you have migraines. Have you tried keto? Oh, you have this. Have you tried keto? But it's because it's true. And he said, it's so unbelievable, you won't believe it. People don't. They don't. I wish I could take credit, but he said it.
I love that.
It's true.
Yeah. I mean, I've been telling people for 25 years, just stop eating sugar, cut back your carbs. And I'm the
That
crazy.
alone, not everybody needs a ketogenic diet. Some people,
Exactly.
look around the world. There's a couple billion people healthy people who eat rice, they eat potatoes, they eat bread. Not everybody needs strict keto, but for the people who do, it can change your life.
Absolutely. And so the ketogenic diet, just to um, shed a little bit more light on this topic, is a low carb diet, but it's more of an extreme low carb diet. So if low carb is over here, the ketogenic diet's on the far reaching outer edge of that. So it's an extreme low carb diet. And that means, you can be on or be eating a low carb diet and never get into ketosis, and that's fine. The idea is that there is a threshold that you must cross in order to kick your body into what we would call therapeutic nutritional ketosis, or when your metabolism starts to metabolize fat as fuel and you produce a ketone as the byproduct of that fat metabolism. So the idea is to create flexibility in the metabolism. So when we talk about metabolism, we're talking about the energy production center of the cells. And this is what gives your body energy. And the body is designed to run on these two fuel sources, both glucose and fat. But we normally don't ever get out of the glucose burning state because we're over consuming carbohydrates, most people 100% of the time. So we're rarely ever in a state of ketosis for very long, and long enough to see the benefits of what it would be like and feel like to actually be burning fat for an extended period of time. And so the ketogenic diet is a very extreme low carb diet. Again, you can be on a low carb diet and never be in ketosis, as we say, or producing ketones. But if you can leverage the idea that you can induce this and anybody can do this. This is what is the beautiful part about the keto diet, is that anyone can leverage this machinery within the cells, because we were perfectly designed to burn both fat and carbohydrate or glucose for fuel, right? So if we can leverage this, we can actually engage a whole healing process in the body that is so fascinating, and it can help to remove and reduce these symptoms that we often see with that have so many different names. And so it's a safe diet. It is something that the body was designed to do. Nobody can take credit for this diet. That's the thing I love about it, is it was actually designed by our own genetic code, by our own blueprint, if you will. So the human body was perfectly designed to know how to do this, and it actually functions quite well when it's doing this. So I think that Dr. Ben Bickman, who I love, if you don't know him, please go look him up on Instagram. He's amazing. But he talks about that ketones are not an alternative fuel. Ketones are actually the preferred fuel for the body and the brain, and glucose is the alternate fuel. And so it's just to open the mind to understanding that this is a real phenomenon, scientifically proven, backed by the body's own intelligence. And that's what I love about it, is, we can't say this is the doctor so and so diet, or the doctor this or that said this or that. I mean, this is something that was actually designed by our own physiology, perfectly suited for our lifestyle. And we just have to wrap our head around this whole new way of living, which is a lifestyle. And this is one of the fastest ways to reverse some of these diseases. So where you may get there eventually with low carb, what I have found in many others is that the ketogenic diet is sort of like the fast track. This is the launching pad for, massive change. So you don't have to be that extreme necessarily. Just cutting out carbs and processed foods and grains can make a huge difference.
I agree with so much that you said, and it's so nice to hear somebody say it because, being in the field that we're in, there are a lot of what we call keto zealots out there. Oh, keto is the only way and it's the best diet and everybody needs to do that. No, no. Some people do really, really well just cutting back a little bit on carbs. And like you said, some you can be on a lowish carb diet and not be in ketosis, and that's fine because maybe you don't need to be in ketosis. Some people notice when they are actually in a deeper level of ketosis, they can feel it, different things happen. Some people don't. I personally, I don't notice much of a difference one way or the other. But the other things that I totally agree with that I cannot emphasize enough is that it's a very, very low carb diet. Like it's an extremely low carb diet. I could not agree more. I don't like when people say keto is a high fat diet. It's high fat. Some people do better on much, much higher fat. I find especially the weight loss clients do better keeping the carbs really low, but with a little more protein and not being afraid of fat, not deliberately skimping on fat, but not going out of their way to like load everything up with oil or melted butter and cheese. That is a big roadblock to fat loss for some people, especially menopausal, postmenopausal women. So I really love when you said keto is an extremely low carb diet. It's not necessarily high fat. Um, and it's it's I totally agree. It's not something that's foreign to the human body. This is simply what happens when you eat very, very little carbohydrate. And it's just that most people in the modern environment never get to a point where they're hardly eating any carbohydrate unless we deliberately do that. The other thing you said that was so so important is that a healthy person can just metabolize fat, metabolize carbs, metabolize ketone. You're just humming along and it's all good. But so many of us have reached a point over the years where our metabolism is not that flexible and we do better eating really low carb. And some people, and Dr. Westman and I wrote about this in End Your Carb Confusion, some people need to be very, very low carb forever. That's how they feel best. Some people can do that for a while, reverse all the issues, get healthy or lose weight, and then reintroduce a moderate or small amount of carbohydrate, and they'll do fine. They don't regain the weight. The type 2 diabetes doesn't come back. So you can actually really literally, you can become more insulin sensitive. You can increase your carbohydrate tolerance, but it takes time. But I think that's important. Like ideally, we could all just shift back and forth and you wouldn't feel any different whether you were burning mostly carbs or mostly fat because you're healthy and your body knows what to do with everything. But I think that even if you do really well on keto at some point, not everybody needs to stay there. Some people can eat, you're never going to get to the point where you're going to go have pasta and breadsticks and cheesecake like every night, but a little bit more carbs either daily or a couple times a month, couple times a week. Some people can do really well with that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that the main objective for anybody who's curious is to just try it and to explore it and see how it works for you. And it's not the end all be all. And there's so many different ways to go about it. And it all depends on your health goals. If you just want to lose 10 pounds, then that's a whole different picture than if you want to prevent seizures, right? You're going to need to be a little bit more diligent. You probably want to have ketones running through your body all the time. This is a totally different model than somebody who just wants to get rid of their 3 inches of belly fat or whatever like that. So it's a very different plan. And that's when it gets a little bit more nuanced. Once you lose the weight, I mean, that's kind of the first step. Get the weight off, get your metabolism back to being flexible. And that's really the main point is start by just getting keto adapted that first time. And Dr. Finney says, it takes 6 weeks to get fully keto adapted. So that's a good amount of time to really flex that muscle, that metabolic muscle that hasn't been used for a really long time. And it may be that the gears in there are a little bit rusty, sort of they need a little bit of nudging. And so this is what you can do with your diet is you can keep just sort of giving your metabolism that message. No, we're burning fat. We're burning fat. We're burning fat. And once all that glucose gets burned out of your body, burned off as fuel, which may be stored in your liver, it's stored in your muscles, it's stored in your bloodstream. Once it gets down to the base level and below, then your body just automatically looks for the next fuel source in line, which is going to be fat. So it's so fascinating to me that the body knows how to do this. And it was perfectly designed to help us to survive periods of starvation. When we were evolving humans and hunting and gathering, we ate a lot of protein and animal fats. Let's be clear. We weren't surviving on the tiny bits of vegetable matter that would maybe get us through times of famine. But on the regular, we were eating animal proteins and animal fats. So you can adjust your macros, you can change things up, you can see what works for you. But the first thing that I would encourage people to do is just try to get into ketosis. Just give it a try, because you don't know the benefits that you're going to experience. And if you try it for 6 weeks and you don't see anything happening, then one, you might be doing it wrong, in which case find a coach that can help you through it and help you sort of pinpoint those little holes that you may not be seeing, that do become quite nuanced depending on your health goals. So don't give up, keep trying, find somebody that can support you. There's lots of people out there like myself and Amy that can walk you through this and really help you dial it in, because it's going to be different for everybody.
One thing we should say is that if somebody's brand, like if they've never tried this before and they're kind of thinking, oh, maybe I should, if you are taking insulin for diabetes, or if you take various other diabetes drugs or blood pressure medicine, please work with a doctor or nurse practitioner or PA or somebody who's qualified to help you adjust that medicine. Because if insulin is the most important to know how to adjust, because you cannot take your same dose of insulin. If you were eating 250 grams of carbs a day and now tomorrow you eat 30 grams of carbs a day, you cannot take the same amount of insulin. You're going to have a dangerous hypo, and so we want you to be safe and careful. So there's websites where you can search for keto friendly medical professionals, and that's my one caveat is, like, if you're taking certain medicine, especially for diabetes or blood pressure, make sure you have medical supervision.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So none of this is medical advice. We're not doctors and we're not here to give you any sort of medical advice. And you definitely want to be working very closely with your primary care physician to help you through this transition, because it will drastically affect the amount of medication that you're taking, especially if you're taking insulin and, like you said, blood pressure medications. So
Yeah, but that's, I mean, that's a good thing. Like, we're not trying to scare anybody. It's a good thing. Like, you need supervision because you're probably going to be able to cut way back on those within a very short time. So,
yeah,
yeah.
it has a very, very dramatic and fast acting effect. So you have to be very mindful and know what you're doing and be working with a skilled healthcare practitioner. And you can find low carb doctors all over, especially on the Low Carb USA website. There's a list of low carbohydrate physicians on that website that you can find, and providers in all over the world, really. So check that out if you need a doctor to help you get off your medications, because that is the goal, right? If you can reduce your medications, something very foundational is going on that's helpful. And we have also sort of been brainwashed to think that once we start taking medication, we're on them for the rest of our life. And that's absolutely not true. You can get off your blood pressure and all the other medications, your insulin, if you change your diet. It's possible to reduce medications if you are willing and consistent with your dietary and lifestyle changes. And like you said, this isn't necessarily all about what you eat. Stress plays a huge part in our metabolic and hormonal functions. And so there's many pieces to this puzzle. But one of the big pieces is really dialing in your diet so that you can manage your blood sugar more, so it's on a more steady, even level throughout the day. And that's really the goal. And so for some people, that means a more extreme approach. For other people, that could just be cutting back way back on your carbs.
Most people who come to me are already doing a low carb or keto style diet, and they're not getting the results they want. So I just help them tweak and change. Most of it is weight loss, but I really, if anyone out there, I so welcome other things because weight loss is such a small piece of it. But I do just get a lot of people also with kind of like fatigue, low energy. I'm actually writing a book right now about thyroid function, so I get a lot of people with thyroid, and keto can help sometimes, sometimes not. But most of what I get is the metabolic syndrome type stuff, the obesity, the high triglyceride, kind of that type of presentation. Um, I do get people coming to me for Alzheimer's or Parkinson's and stuff like that. Um, Unfortunately, most of the people who come to me for that are the adult children of somebody who was already in an institution or a facility somewhere. And if that person's food supply is out of your control, there's very little you can do. If they live with you, if you are their primary caregiver, maybe then we can get somewhere. But if the food is out of your hands, it's pretty hard. But I I like to think of myself as a keto detective. Like I said, most people who come to me are already doing this and they're not getting where they want to go. And so we just, we think about, okay, what is standing in the way here and what do we need to change?
Yeah. That's the same person that I seem to be working with, as well as the person that's tried everything and they've been doing keto for 2 years and they can't seem to lose any weight. And I said, well, let's dive into the details and see what's really going on. And usually it just, like you said, I'm a keto detective as well. So we just really start digging around in the weeds, really see what's actually happening, and then fine tune things. And oftentimes it just takes a little tweaking. And if you stick with it and keep learning new things, you'll figure it out. So don't get discouraged if that's you. And so with the cognitive decline in these disorders that you've written about in your book, I think that the most inspiring sort of possibilities that I see with this is really in the realm of prevention. Because, like you said, if you're already in a skilled nursing home, you're not going to do much to change and to reverse somebody's Alzheimer's or dementia. But if you can prevent yourself, at least, from getting it, or a parent that isn't in that place quite yet, that's when this becomes really very tangible. And so, what can we do, just practical things during the day as aging middle aged adults? I mean, I'm in my 50s and I have 4 kids and 2 grandkids. And of course, I don't ever want to think of myself as being a burden on my children when I get into my 60s or 70s or 80s. And so, of course, I'm very hyper sensitive to the things that I can do now to prevent these sort of things from happening. And what would you offer to somebody who is in our shoes and does want to prevent these things, that just like some simple things that someone might consider doing on a daily basis?
Yeah, I get this question a lot, and I always, as a writer, I'm like ultra careful with my words. So I always say potentially prevent. I would say more like reduce risk. What can we, because we don't know for certain that we can prevent Alzheimer's or Parkinson's or something. I think we can, but we can't say for sure. So to reduce risk, well, what are the big risk factors? And let's take care of those. So anything you can do to keep that blood sugar and insulin within a healthy range is going to be huge for reducing risk. And like we said earlier, some people need a strict keto diet to accomplish that. Some don't. Some can have more carbs and just still be metabolically healthy and flexible. Um, I I liken it to the example I often use in talks and stuff is the strategy that you need to reverse a problem once it's already happened is not necessarily the same strategy you need to prevent it from happening in the first place. So if you have an insect infestation in your home, you will call an exterminator and they'll come and they'll spray all the toxic stuff. Okay, great, problem solved. But you could have maybe prevented the infestation in the first place by just, keeping your windows shut or not leaving food out on the counter kind of thing. So what lower level things can we do? And I think some variation of a low-ish carb diet is a huge foundation. I do think exercise and staying physically active is huge because we know that that's a massive, way to reduce risk for so many things. And it's not because of weight loss. I think it's because of what exercise does, or even just activity, just walking does to insulin sensitivity. So
Hmm.
even if you're still over, you can be heavier and be perfectly healthy on the inside. That's something that we don't talk about enough. And you can be thin and be a train wreck. So
Mm.
it's not exercise for the purpose of weight, but for the purpose of like what's happening biochemically inside. And sleep seems to be a really big thing with Alzheimer's, but also because poor sleep affects all that insulin and glucose, all those dynamics. And so I think getting good quality and quantity sleep, and I don't think you need to pull 42 different the sauna and fasting and sunlight and a million things. Let's just be realistic here. How much can we actually accomplish? How much time and energy, whether physical or mental and emotional, are we willing to devote? And what are the biggest movers going to be? And I think the biggest movers are going to be the diet and probably physical activity and sleep.
Mm,
And if there's one of those that you can't do, be more diligent about the others. And just as one example, people who are in wheelchairs have lost 100 pounds with low carb diets without exercise or whatever exercise they're getting if they're in like a manual type of wheelchair. You know what I mean? So you don't have to be running triathlons, you don't have to be doing sprints, but if you can't exercise, then be that much more diligent about the diet. Or if you're a shift worker or you are somebody's caretaker and your sleep is really disturbed, okay, the sleep is not going to be good for you. Focus more on the other things that you can control. That I almost forgot because
mhm.
I was saying like, oh, this insulin glucose stuff isn't the only issue. I'm just going to say statin drugs that are used to lower cholesterol do have the side effect of memory loss and confusion. And that's not me making that up. That is directly from the US FDA's website, where they have several warnings about statins. There's different kinds of statins. The types that cross the blood brain barrier are more likely to have those cognitive effects. So that's an issue. A vitamin B12 deficiency can cause neurological problems independent of all this glucose insulin stuff. So, and anyone that's been on like an antacid drug for a very long time maybe should have their, I think anyone with any cognitive or neurological problem should have their B12 level checked. And it's not enough to be normal. If you're at the very bottom of the range, you need to be higher. So there's these other things too, but those I think are more easily corrected. If you're taking a statin and you're having memory problems, talk to your doctor about maybe stopping it or switching to a different drug. Um, if you think you need to lower cholesterol at all, that's a whole different episode. But get your B12 checked. There's these other factors that should be easy enough to identify on a simple blood test.
Yeah, that's great information. Thank you. And can you say a little bit more about antacids?
Yeah, these drugs are not benign. They're not neutral. They're not as benign as we think they are. They don't just some, depending on the type of drug, some of them inhibit your own body's production of stomach acid. Some of them neutralize the acid that's already been produced. Either way, the end result is that your body does not absorb all of the nutrients in your food as easily because you have literally cut your digestion off at the knees. We produce stomach acid for a reason. And oddly enough, acid reflux, GERD tend to go away on low carb diets, even for people who still drink coffee or eat tomato sauce and lemon juice and all that acidic stuff. For so many people, it's the carbs, it's not the acid. But yeah, when you take a drug that is intended to interfere with your digestion, you're going to have stomach acid is absolutely required to absorb the B12. And there's another factor that also is needed for B12, for iron, for calcium, magnesium, all of these things. And so, and not that everyone who ever takes an antacid is going to have these problems, but they are a potential risk. And especially if you've been on them for a very long time. It's not drugs never just do one thing, or in the course of doing that one thing, it neutralizes or reduces the acid. What is the effect of that? Okay, now I have less stomach acid. What's going to come from that? Oh, I'm not going to digest my food properly.
Right. So you become nutrient deficient, you become anemic, the list goes on and on. Do you have anything else to add about the vitamin B12 in particular? Because I know that there's a lot of talk out there about the dangers of meat consumption and that sort of thing. And what I find is that most people are leaning a little bit in the opposite direction of being so fearful that they're actually creating these nutrient deficiencies and anemia and other things as a result of being sort of afraid, if you will, to eat animal protein.
Red meat is one of the most nutrient-rich foods you can consume. And that's not the only source of B12, it's not the only source of iron, but it is a rich source. And so, if you avoid red meat for some reason, you can get these nutrients from other foods, but it's if you're avoiding it for cultural reasons or religious reasons, or some people have actually like an intolerance to beef or something, that's one thing. But if you're avoiding it because you think it's harmful or you think it's dangerous somehow for your health, I'm a nutritionist and I'm telling you right now that that is false. I just think, and there's other gastrointestinal problems that can lead to B12. Even taking the drug metformin.
Hmm.
Metformin in some people can lower B12 levels. But I just, it's like you were saying earlier, we evolved on animal fat and protein. That's what we evolved on
And that's
eating.
why we have so much stomach acid, by the way.
Yeah. We don't have this super acidic, juice in our stomach to digest kale smoothies. And I just, we don't need to be afraid of red meat. This is so TL Cleve, a British doctor from decades and decades ago, said something like, for a new disease to be coming from an old food is one of the most ridiculous things I've ever heard. Yeah, how are we blaming all of these brand new diseases on foods we've been eating for thousands, if not millions of years?
Free of chronic illness, by the way.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, Amy, I really want to honor your time and wrap this up. So if there's anything you might want to just parting words, something that you might want to leave the listeners with, what might that be, if anything?
Yeah, if anyone out there, if you feel overwhelmed, like, oh, this keto sounds really crazy, it sounds like there's so much I have to learn, check out my book, End Your Carb Confusion. It's actually much simpler than you think it is. I know on YouTube, on Reddit, on wherever, you're seeing people do a million different things. Most of those things are not required to do really well with a
Mm.
lower carb or keto diet. Most of what's required is just cutting your carbs. Everything else is extra little bonus. The main thing that's going to get you big results is just cutting way back on the sugar and starch. It really just, it's so much simpler than you think.
I realize that what you've heard here is a radical departure from today's politically correct nutritional guidance. If it were politically correct, it would be endorsed by the media. And if it was endorsed by the media, it would be endorsed by Big Pharma. Let's face it, Big Pharma makes money when you and I stay sick. The real truth is, you can take control of your health with an intelligently designed plan. After helping people get keto adapted for over 25 years, I have found that everyone who succeeds does three very specific things. I've included all three in my book, How to Start a Keto Diet, and you can download your free copy at radicalhealthmakeover.com.